Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me get my first 1,000 subscribers. It's one click for you, but for me it's a huge encouragement and motivation. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's go. Ryan sat slumped deep in an armchair that had seen better days, its upholstery a scratchy, faded plaid that smelled faintly of dust and lemon pledge. The waiting room was cramped, illuminated by a single wall sconce that cast long, weak shadows against the beige wallpaper. Outside, the relentless Seattle drizzle hammered against the window pane, filtering a gray, depressing light into the room. On the low coffee table in front of him lay a fan of magazines, their corners dog-eared and their covers bleached by the sun. Most were months-old people, Good Housekeeping, generic lifestyle glossies promising 10 ways to save your skin this winter, or the best pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving. Ryan did not touch them. He would not give this place the satisfaction of seeing him fidget. Instead, he focused on the generic classical music drifting from a ceiling speaker. It was too calm, too sanitized for a room where people sat waiting for their lives to implode. His eyes traced the water stain on the drop ceiling, then moved to the cheap blinds on the window. He was cataloging the cracks in the plaster to avoid dealing with the crushing weight in his chest. It felt like a physical object, a stone sitting right on his sternum. Through the thin drywall, he thought he could hear murmuring, but it might have just been the blood rushing in his ears. Suddenly, the door to the hallway opened. Vanessa walked in. Ryan's muscles seized up. Her steps were light, but hesitant. She paused at the threshold, looking like she might turn around and bolt, then stepped inside and eased the door shut, wincing as the latch clicked. She looked up, catching his eye. Her expression was a wreck, a forced, tight-lipped smile that did not reach her eyes. She stood by the door, her manicured fingers nervously kneading the leather of her Michael Kors clutch. "Hey!" she whispered, staying rooted to the spot. Ryan did not answer. He jerked his head away, staring intently at the rain-streaked window. If he looked her in the eye, the dam would break, and he was not about to lose it in a strip mall therapist's office. Vanessa took a few tentative steps closer, her heels making a dull thud-thud on the industrial carpet. She hovered near the table, reaching for a magazine as a distraction, then pulling her hand back. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the heater. When he did not respond, she sank into the empty chair next to him. They were sitting close now, too close. The 2 feet of air between their armchairs felt like a canyon filled with weeks of screaming matches and icy silence. Ryan remained a statue. His face was a mask of indifference, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the armrests. He did not want to be here. Why am I doing this? The question looped in his brain like a broken record. Vanessa exhaled shakily. She turned her head, studying his profile. "I know this sucks," she said after a long, agonizing pause. "But I really want to fix this, Ryan." Ryan snapped his head around. His glare was so cold it made her physically recoil. He did not say a word. The silence was louder than if he de-screamed. Vanessa looked down, clutching her bag like a life preserver. She took a deep breath to speak, but a sound from the inner office cut her off. Someone was sobbing. Loudly. Vanessa's eyes widened, a flash of genuine panic crossing her face. The inner door creaked open. A woman walked out, clutching a tissue to her blotchy, red face. She speed-walked past them without making eye contact and vanished into the hallway. The waiting room fell back into a heavy, suffocating silence. Vanessa let out a trembling breath and looked back at Ryan. "I hope, Dr. Marks can help us," she said, her voice wavering. "We can get past this. We have to." Ryan gave a non-committal shrug. He was terrified that if he opened his mouth, he'd vomit up all the toxicity he'd been swallowing for weeks. The office door opened again. A woman in her late 40s stepped out. She had short, practical hair and an air of authority that suggested she'd seen every variety of marital disaster Seattle had to offer. Dr. Fran Marks. Her name was on a brushed steel plaque on the door. She wore a slouchy brown cardigan over a green skirt, looking professional but approachable. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over them, cataloging their body language in a split second. Vanessa nodded immediately, standing up and smoothing down her dress, trying to regain some composure. Ryan stayed seated, staring at a spot on the wall just past the doctor's ear. "Welcome, dear," Mark said, moving past the awkwardness. "Please come on back." Her voice was neutral, practiced. She turned and walked into her office. Vanessa took a step, realized Ryan had not moved, and stopped. "Ryan," she whispered. He did not look up for a solid 5 seconds. Finally, he groaned, pushing himself up from the chair with the enthusiasm of a man walking to the gallows. He waved a hand at her. "Go ahead." Vanessa gave him a look that was 1 part gratitude and 2 parts fear, then followed the doctor. Dr. Mark's office was surprisingly spacious, a stark contrast to the cramped waiting room. The walls were painted a soft, calming sage green. A large mahogany desk sat by the window, cluttered with organized stacks of files and a yellow legal pad. In the corner, a Keurig machine hummed on a side table. The room smelled of vanilla and old books. "Have a seat, Dr. Mark said, gesturing to 2 plush armchairs facing her desk. Vanessa sat down, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap, trying to look poised. Ryan sat slowly, testing the chair's weight. He did not cross his legs. He sat squarely, feet planted, arms on the rests, like he was bracing for impact. Dr. Mark sat opposite them. She steeped her fingers, leaning her elbows on the desk, and looked at them. The silence stretched out, heavy and awkward. "All right," she began, her tone calm but commanding. "As I understand it, Judge Reynolds mandated this mediation session at the request of Vanessa's attorney before moving forward with the divorce proceedings. Is that correct?" Vanessa nodded quickly. "Yes, we're here to try to salvage this." Her voice was thin, lacking conviction. Ryan stayed silent, staring at the diploma on the wall behind the doctor. "Ryan." The doctor shifted her focus to him. "What about you? Why did you agree to come today?" He slowly turned his head, his eyes dead and tired. "The judge said I had to be here," he said flatly, then looked away again. Dr. Marks nodded, jotting something down on her legal pad. "Okay," she said. "Let's start with the basics. You both have your own narratives about what happened. But in this room we need radical honesty. Not just with yourselves, but with each other. That's the only way to move the needle." She looked at Vanessa. "Vanessa, tell me why you believe this marriage is worth saving." Vanessa stared at her heels. She held her breath for a second, then spoke fast, like she was running out of time. "Because I still love him," she said, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake, but it does not erase 10 years. I want him back home. The kids miss him. My parents. Everyone wants us to work this out." Ryan let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He did not look at her. "Ryan, Dr. Marks interjected. You heard your wife. What's your take on that?" He lifted his chin slightly. "I think words are cheap," he said, his voice gravelly. "Actions speak louder." Vanessa turned to him, eyes welling up. "But I did not, Dr. Marks held up a hand. "We'll get to the specifics in a moment. Ryan, you feel that Vanessa has broken the trust in this marriage. Is that right?" He nodded once. "She did not just break it," he said quietly. "She took it out back and shot it." Vanessa flinched. She looked away, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. Dr. Marks watched them closely, missing nothing. "Okay," the doctor said. "That's a start. We have a lot of ground to cover if we're going to get anywhere today." The office felt pressurized, the silence heavy enough to crush a lung. The only sound was the scratching of Dr. Mark's pen against her legal pad. Ryan sat like he was carved from granite, staring past his reflection in the rain-slicked window, looking for answers in the gray Seattle skyline that simply were not there. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked like she was coming apart at the seams. Her fingers worked the leather of her clutch, white-knuckled and trembling. She knew the time for dancing around the truth was over. "Vanessa, dear," Mark said. Her voice was soft but had the tensile strength of steel wire. She was a pro. She knew how to open a vein without making a mess. "I want you to walk me through this from the beginning. What was the catalyst? Where did the fracture start?" Vanessa took a shaky breath, trying to organize the chaos in her head. Her throat felt tight, like she was swallowing glass, but staying silent was no longer an option. "It was 5 weeks ago," she started, her voice thin. I told Ryan I was planning to meet up with another man. It was a stupid idea, just an impulse, really. Looking back, it sounds horrible." She spoke quietly, her eyes fixed on the carpet. She could not bring herself to look at her husband, knowing that the glacial judgment in his eyes would shatter whatever composure she had left. Ryan whipped his head around. His face was a mask of calm, but the muscle jumping in his jaw told a different story. "Planning to meet up," he repeated, the words echoing with a hollow thud. His tone was low, dangerously level. "Is that how we re-spinning it now?" Vanessa tried to force a weak, apologetic smile, but it died on her lips instantly. She looked down, dodging his gaze. "I did not go, Ryan," she said quickly, breathless. "I called it off." "You missing the point." Ryan cut her off, his voice rising just enough to freeze the air in the room. "I do not care if you went or not. The problem is that you even entertained the idea." "Dr." Marks raised an eyebrow, her pen hovering over the paper. She made a quick note, then leaned forward, bridging the gap between them. "Vanessa," she said, steering the conversation back before it crashed. "Can you elaborate on the headspace you were in? What drove you to that point? And why did you decide to tell your husband beforehand?" Vanessa uncrossed and recrossed her legs, her breathing shallow. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped bird before landing helplessly on the therapist. "It was a moment of weakness," she stammered. "I just felt so isolated. Ryan is always grinding at work, pulling late nights. I felt like a ghost in my own house. And then there was this guy. He paid attention. He actually saw me. I know it sounds cliché and stupid, but I wanted to be transparent. That's why I told Ryan." "Transparent?" Ryan scoffed, the irony dripping from his voice like acid. "You call telling your husband you re-drafting a roadmap to infidelity transparency?" Vanessa flushed a deep crimson. Her lip quivered, but she fought back the tears. "I was not planning on sleeping with him," she protested, her voice rising in pitch. "It was just drinks. Just a date." Ryan let out a harsh, incredulous laugh and threw his head back against the chair. "Just a date?" he mimicked. "Tell me, Vanessa, what was the game plan for after the second round of drinks? A handshake and a wave goodbye?" "Nothing," she cried out, her voice cracking. "I would not have let it go further. I just wanted to figure out what I wanted from my life." Ryan stood up abruptly. The motion was sharp, violent in its suddenness. He walked to the window, turning his back on her to stare at the wet pavement below. He stood there for a few seconds, hands balled into fists, before exhaling a long, ragged breath. "You know," he said without turning around, "the logistics do not matter to me. That's the intent. That's the only thing that counts. You were ready to do it. You made the reservation in your head. Everything else is just damage control." "Dr." Marks raised a hand gently, signaling for a pause. "Ryan," she said, firm but compassionate, "let me clarify. Are you saying that the intention itself is a deal breaker? That the thought holds the same weight as the action?" He turned back to face them. The hurt in his eyes was raw, naked enough that even Dr. Marks shifted slightly in her seat. "Yeah," he answered, clipping the word, "because intent is a choice, and she made her choice." Vanessa let out a sob, her head dropping as her shoulders shook. She felt the foundations of her life crumbling, every word she spoke only accelerating the collapse. But some survival instinct kicked in, forcing her to look up. "I canceled it," she whispered, pleading. "I realized it was a mistake. I wanted to fix us." Ryan just shook his head slowly. "You realized it was a mistake only after I refused to accept it," he said. "That does not undo the betrayal, Vanessa." Dr. Marks watched the dynamic closely, calculating the blast radius of the emotional damage. She set her pen down and clasped her hands. "Vanessa," she said, "you want Ryan to trust you again, to give this marriage a fighting chance. But for that to happen, you need to understand exactly why that trust has flatlined." Vanessa looked at her, mute, her eyes searching the Dr.'s face for a lifeline. Ryan sat back down heavily, moving like a man carrying 100 pounds of gear on his back. "It's pointless," he said, staring right at Dr. Marks. "She can spin it however she wants. But in my book, she already burned the house down." Dr. Marks made another note, then looked up, her expression unreadable. "We just scratching the surface here," she said calmly, "and I think we need to drill down into the emotions driving this. But first, Vanessa, I need full disclosure. No justifications, just the facts." Vanessa shrank into her chair, looking like she wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Dr. Marks adjusted her glasses, her demeanor shifting into high gear. She looked from Ryan to Vanessa, assessing the wreckage. "Let's try to parse this out," she said finally. "Vanessa, you claim you still love your husband. Break that down for me. What does that look like to you right now?" Vanessa lifted her chin, her eyes glistening with tears she was fighting to hold back. "I love Ryan," she said, her voice shaking but insistent. "I've always loved him. What happened? It was stupidity. A lapse in judgment. I'd give anything to take back. But that does not mean I stopped loving him." Ryan snorted, his mouth twisting into a bitter smirk. "You love me?" he asked, his tone laced with venom. "If that's your version of love, I'd hate to see what your hate looks like." Vanessa flinched as if he slapped her, but she held her ground. She turned her body toward him, her expression desperate. "Ryan," she implored, her voice dropping to a hush. "I did not do anything unforgivable. I did not go on the date. I did not cheat on you. I woke up, I realized what I was doing, and I stopped it. Does that count for nothing?" Ryan straightened up, his eyes flashing with cold anger. "Does it count?" He enunciated slowly. "You want a gold star for not going through with it? You want me to forget everything because you got cold feet? You do not get it, Vanessa. You already crossed the line. The trust is gone. You killed it the second you thought you could find something better." His voice was hard, hitting like a gavel. Vanessa dropped her head, her hands trembling, lips pressed into a tight, white line. Dr. Marks scribbled a few rapid notes, then set the legal pad aside and leaned forward, clasping her hands. "Ryan," she said, her tone shifting to a lower, more empathetic register. "I hear the pain in your voice, but let's try to reframe this. Vanessa is sitting here telling you she loves you. Do you believe there is zero truth to that?" Ryan looked at the doctor with a heavy, leaden gaze, as if debating whether the energy required to answer was even worth it. "No," he said bluntly. Then he added, "Words are cheap. If she actually loved me, the thought of meeting this guy would not have even crossed her mind. It would not have been an option." Vanessa's head snapped up, her eyes wide and desperate. "That is not fair," she cried. "You re-convicting me for a crime I did not commit. You not giving me a single inch to prove that I am still here, that I am fighting for us." Ryan looked at her with zero warmth. "You already proved who you are," he said, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "You proved it when you let another man into your head. Love is a verb, Vanessa. That's what you do, not the excuses you make after you get caught." Vanessa let out a ragged breath, her shoulders slumping as if an invisible weight had just been dropped on them. She turned to Dr. Marks, her voice barely a whisper. "What can I do?" she asked, the fight draining out of her. "How do I fix this if he would not let me?" Dr. Marks looked at her thoughtfully, then pivoted back to Ryan. "Repair is a process, not a switch we flip," she said carefully. "But we need to establish a baseline. Ryan, are you willing to do the work to rebuild that trust? Or have you already signed the papers in your mind?" Ryan hesitated. The fire in his eyes dimmed into a dull gray fatigue. He did not answer immediately. His fingers dug into the armrests of the chair. He started, then trailed off. He sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to scrape his throat, and turned back to the rainy window. "I do not know how you rebuild a foundation with someone who was ready to walk out the door." Vanessa buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Dr. Marks leaned in closer, her voice soft but persistent. "Vanessa," she asked, "if you could step into a time machine and go back 5 weeks, what would you do differently?" Vanessa looked up, her face blotchy and red. "I would not have even entertained it," she said with fierce sincerity. "I would have focused on Ryan, on us, on our family. I would not have replied to a single text." Ryan looked at her with an expression that was hard to parse. A cocktail of anger, disappointment, and maybe a microscopic grain of doubt. "Day late and $1 short," he finally said. He sounded exhausted, like a man who did not believe his own cynicism but could not find a way out of it. Dr. Marks folded her arms on the desk and took a deep breath. "We still have time on the clock," she said. "But you both need to actually hear each other. That's the only way out of this deadlock, regardless of where you end up." The words hung in the air, filling the space between the sterile office walls. Dr. Marks sat back, watching them with the intensity of a judge during a closing argument. The silence in the room stretched thin, amplifying the feeling that this was not just therapy. It was a trial, and the verdict was imminent. "Intention," Dr. Marks said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was even, but there was a new energy behind it. "It's a tricky concept. A lot of people think intentions are harmless until they become actions. But it's rarely that black and white." She leaned forward again, creating a sense of intimacy. Vanessa looked at her with tragic hope. Ryan looked like he was waiting for the sentencing. "Vanessa," the doctor continued, "you say you did nothing wrong because you did not go. And physically that's true. You canceled the date. That was the right call. But I have to ask, why did you say yes in the first place?" Vanessa swallowed hard, her fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her skirt. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it again, terrified of handing Ryan more ammunition. She started quietly. "I was confused. I did not know how to process what I was feeling." Dr. Marks nodded, her face neutral. "Understood," she said. "But be honest. Did you realize that simply agreeing to the date would be viewed by Ryan as a betrayal?" Vanessa looked away, tears spilling over again. I did not think about it like that at the time," she whispered. "I just wanted to feel needed, validated." Ryan scoffed, a harsh sound that made Vanessa jump. "Needed?" he repeated, the sarcasm thick enough to choke on. "What about being needed by me? Or the kids? Does that not count for validation?" Vanessa sobbed, her body shuddering. Dr. Marks raised a hand, cutting off the interruption. "Ryan," she said, "let me ask you this. Do you believe that the intention alone constitutes a breach of contract?" He looked at her, his eyes cold but weary. "Absolutely," he said. "If you willing to walk up to the line that destroys your marriage, you already gone. The fact that she backed out does not change the mindset. It's like conspiracy to commit bank robbery. You case the joint, you buy the masks. Just because you get cold feet at the door does not mean you are not guilty. You still planned the heist." Dr. Marks raised her eyebrows. "That's a strong analogy," she noted. "But let's unpack it. You see Vanessa's intention as equal to the crime. But if the robber walks away before entering the bank, is not that evidence of a conscience? Does not that show they realized the cost was too high? Ryan tightened his jaw, his knuckles white on the chair arms. Realized? He countered. She only realized it because I did not give her a pass. Her apology is not remorse, Doc. S panic. She is not sorry she did it. She is sorry she is facing the consequences. Dr. Marks nodded slowly, jotting down a note. She turned back to Vanessa. Vanessa, she asked gently, do you understand why Ryan views it through that lens? Vanessa nodded, her voice barely a squeak. I get it, she whispered. I do. But I did not want to hurt him. I did not have the vocabulary to say what was wrong with us. Dr. Marks paused, studying her notepad for a moment as if weighing her next move. Let me borrow your analogy, Ryan, she said, her voice projecting a bit more authority. If someone plans that robbery, yes, it is a crime. But if that person walks away before the first dollar is stolen, does the law not treat them differently than the one who empties the vault? Ryan frowned, his gaze hardening. It does not change the fact that they were ready to do it, he argued. The intent poisons the well. How am I supposed to sleep next to someone who was ready to cash me out? Dr. Marks leaned back, her hands still clasped. Trust is fragile, she admitted, and rebuilding it is heavy lifting. But to move forward, we need to answer one binary question. Do you want to fix this? Or have you already decided it is impossible? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Vanessa looked at Ryan, her eyes begging. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to earn you back, she said, her voice trembling. But you have to give me a shot. Ryan looked at her, his face a stone wall. A shot? He repeated. Vanessa, you took your shot. And you missed. Dr. Marks stood up slowly. We need to keep this dialogue open, she said. But I want you both to sit with a specific question. What is more important to you right now? Saving the relationship or being right? She fell silent, letting the weight of the ultimatum settle over them. The room sank back into that thick, suffocating silence, broken only by the faint, polite classical music and the relentless Seattle rain against the glass. Dr. Marks watched them, the mediator in a war where both sides were losing. Vanessa sat huddled in her armchair, her eyes rimmed red, clinging to the last shreds of hope like a lifeline. Her grip on her clutch was so tight her knuckles had turned a ghostly white. Ryan, in contrast, looked like a man who had already signed the paperwork in his mind. His posture was rigid but still, his face set in stone. Ryan, Dr. Marks began, her voice softening. I know this is an incredibly heavy burden, but before you verbalize anything final, I need to make sure you fully calculated the cost. We are not just talking about the end of a marriage. We talking about the ripple effects on you, on Vanessa, on your children. This changes the landscape of your entire family. Ryan looked at her, his gaze cool and focused. I've run the scenarios, he said slowly, each word landing with a dull thud. I've thought about it from every angle, and I know this is the right call. Vanessa flinched physically, her shoulders dropping as if his words were a physical blow. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her, resulting in a choked sob. She stared down at her trembling hands. Ryan, she finally managed, her voice thin and laced with desperation. I know I messed up. I own that. But does not love mean forgiveness? Say not you give me just one more chance to prove I can fix this? He looked at her, and for a second, the mask slipped, revealing a depth of pain he had been keeping under lock and key. Love means respect, Vanessa, he said evenly, and you torched that. You can rationalize it all you want, but I see not trust you anymore, and without trust we have nothing. She cried out, harder this time, her hands flying to her face to hide the tears. She was shaking now, vibrating like a window pane in a storm. Dr. Marks stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. She walked over to Vanessa and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Vanessa, she said gently, I can see how badly you want to save this. But right now, you need to accept that Ryan's decision is his own. It is a boundary you see not cross, and a choice you see not control. Vanessa looked up, her face distorted by grief. But I see not just let him go, she whispered. I see not imagine my life without him. Dr. Marks leaned down slightly, meeting her gaze. It hurts like hell, she acknowledged. But sometimes the only way to move forward is to admit that you see not go back. She straightened up and returned to her desk, turning her attention to Ryan. Ryan, she asked formally, is this your final decision? He nodded, his expression flat. It is, he answered firmly. I see not live with someone who does not respect me the way I respected her. Vanessa broke down again, burying her face in her hands. Ryan did not flinch. He kept his eyes trained on the wall ahead, as if looking at her would cost him the last of his resolve. Dr. Marks nodded, accepting the verdict. She made a final, decisive note on her pad. Then she stood up, her demeanor professional but kind. That concludes our joint mediation, she said, her voice steady. Ryan, I will notify the court and your attorneys that mediation has reached an impasse and you are proceeding with the divorce. She turned to Vanessa. Vanessa, I strongly recommend we continue with individual sessions. You're going to need tools to navigate this grief and find a way to pivot. Vanessa just nodded, staring at the floor. Ryan pushed himself up from the chair. He moved slowly, but with purpose. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at Vanessa one last time. There was no hate in his eyes, just a profound sense of loss. Then, he turned away, opened the door, and walked out into the hallway. When the latch clicked shut, Vanessa pressed her hands to her face, a fresh wave of sobbing filling the small room. Dr. Marks walked around the desk again, crouched down to eye level and put a hand on her arm. You are stronger than you feel right now, she said softly. You will get through this. But to Vanessa, staring at the empty chair where her husband used to be, the words meant absolutely nothing. 1 year later, the rain in Seattle had not changed. It was still that same gray, persistent drizzle that soaked into your bones, but Ryan did not mind it as much anymore. He stood on the balcony of his new apartment in Belltown, looking out at the haze over Elliott Bay. The place was smaller than the house he and Vanessa had shared, but it was his. No ghosts in the hallway, no echoes of arguments in the kitchen. Life had settled into a new rhythm, a new normal, as his friends kept calling it. He was hitting the gym 4 days a week, burying himself in work at the firm, and he had even started dating again. Nothing serious, just a few dinners with a paralegal named Sarah. She was nice. She was uncomplicated. But Ryan found himself keeping a wall up, a reflex he could not quite shake. The trust issues did not vanish just because the divorce papers were signed. They just went underground. He checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. He was meeting a client at a coffee shop in South Lake Union. He grabbed his jacket and headed out. Vanessa locked the door to her duplex in Ballard. It was a downgrade from their old life, sure, but she de-painted the walls a bright, defiant yellow, a color Ryan would have hated. The last 12 months had been a brutal crash course in growing up. There were months of therapy where Dr. Marks, whom she continued to see alone, had peeled back the layers of her need for validation. Vanessa had learned the hard way that looking for happiness in someone else's eyes was a recipe for disaster. She was single, intentionally. She spent her weekends hiking in the Cascades or taking pottery classes, learning to be comfortable in the silence of her own company. The panic of being alone, that terrifying void that had nearly driven her into an affair, was slowly being filled with self-respect. She pulled her coat tighter and ducked into Slate Coffee Roasters to grab a latte before her shift started. The coffee shop was crowded, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and damp wool. Ryan was standing at the counter, waiting for his Americano, scrolling through emails on his phone. Ryan. The voice was familiar, hitting a frequency in his brain he thought he'd overwritten. He turned around. Vanessa stood there, shaking out a wet umbrella. Her hair was different, shorter, lighter. She looked tired but solid. The frantic, nervous energy that had defined her in Dr. Mark's office was gone. "Vanessa," Ryan said. His voice was neutral. No anger, no longing, just recognition. "Hi," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I did not expect to run into you here." "Meeting a client nearby," Ryan said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "You look good." "I'm doing okay," she said, and for the first time in years, Ryan believed her. "I'm figuring things out. Finally." "That's good." Ryan nodded. "I'm glad to hear that." An awkward silence stretched between them, but it was not the heavy, suffocating silence of the therapy room. It was the silence of two strangers who used to know each other's secrets. "Do you?" Vanessa started, then hesitated. "Do you ever think about the what-ifs?" Ryan looked at her. He thought about the empty side of his bed. He thought about the peace he felt when he came home to a quiet apartment. He thought about the trust he was slowly learning to give to someone new. "No," Ryan said gently, but with absolute finality. "I do not." "We made the right call, Vanessa." Vanessa held his gaze for a long moment. There were tears in her eyes, but they did not fall. She nodded, accepting the boundary. "Yeah," she whispered. "I guess we did." The barista called out, "Americano for Ryan." "That's me," Ryan said. He grabbed his cup and turned back to her. "Take care of yourself, Vanessa." "You too, Ryan." He walked out the door, stepping back into the rain. He did not look back. He took a sip of the hot coffee, felt the warmth spread through his chest, and walked toward his future, leaving the past where it belonged, behind the glass of the coffee shop window. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.